Okay, so this is Sharpening for Dummies 201, and I don't want to uh, give anybody the impression that they're a dummy when it comes to sharpening, but if you struggle with sharpening knives, I'm really trying to bring this thing down to the brass tacks, to the really lowest common denominator level. If you haven't seen my video on Sharpening for Dummies 101, go ahead and look that up on YouTube now. Just put in the search engine Sharpening for Dummies 101. I'm using the same red background as you see now. Exactly the same knife will be in the picture probably when you pull it up, and it will. You really have to watch that, because if you don't, you're going to miss out on a lot, and this will be a little bit more confusing. So watch the first video, come back to here. So just quickly to recap, um, we're going to talk about burrs. Okay, a lot of people out there, they talk about burrs, and I've, in the first video that I talked about, I really started to refer to that as a layover. Okay, so, and the point is when you take a knife and you're gonna run it across the stone, and that side that you're sharpening is going to lay over this way, away from the blade. So if I had a graphical representation of that, as that stone goes across it, it's going to push the tip of that blade off to the right. And then of course, as you bring the stone over on this side and start doing it that way, it's going to push it off to the left. And this is what a lot of people would kind of refer to be a burr. I'm calling it layover, and because I think it makes a little bit more sense, at least in my mind. I like the idea of that layover, where that thing's pushing off to one side, pushing off to the other. And the point is you want a real chisel point. You want that thing to just be just at the right angle, at the 30-degree angle or the 23-degree angle, whatever your knife is, so that it doesn't push off to one side or push off the other, and it's going to give you your cleanest cutting surface. Okay. Rule number one in the last video: if you can control that layover, you're going to have a sharp knife. So control your layover equals sharpness, because if the blade is laid over this way, it's not going to be its sharpest, because it's only cutting really on one half of the blade. And if it's laid over this way, just the same thing. As you draw that knife across whatever you're trying to cut, only that one edge is doing it. It's going to be a weaker edge, and it's kind of a tendency to lay over even more. So the point is the way I'm sharpening knives is I want to control that, so that we have this chisel point that can't do that. Okay, rule number two, which you'll find in the last video as well: grit times pressure equals finish. Okay, when we're getting into this level of deal, what we did on the last video is we took this buck knife, which was my son's, that was really, really super dull at the time. And that's the problem when you're working with a guy who knows how to sharpen knives, is, gee, many crimes, I can't find a knife in my house, it's dull. Okay, so I have to start searching around, and I found this knife on my son's. It's a Buck USA, 4.5-inch blade, really nice size hunting gunning knife. And it was like somebody drug it over a barbed wire. It was really dull. So on the last video, we took it and we took a diamond stone, 400 grit on one side, 600 on the other, and go back and watch that. You can show how we took it on the 400, how we took it on the 600. We kind of got it up to a point where almost could cut paper. I mean, but when you're talking about a 600 grit stone, you're talking about stuff that a lot of people don't even bother with. They're like, I don't want to get anything that's that coarse. So we didn't quite get as close as we wanted to, but the bottom line is that if you ran your hand across this way, you'd have blood squirting out all over the place, like a really cheap Saturday Night Live deal, and I'm not going to go there. So on this video here, we're going to continue the finishing process. This is Sharpening for Dummies 201. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out, remember on the last video we had a 400 and 600 grit diamond stone, and they make these things in a lot of different grits, and you could continue on a diamond stone, but I just happen to have an Arkansas hard stone here, which has served me for quite a few years, and I'm going to go ahead and go to that. Most people consider the Arkansas hards to be about an 800 grit, and I think that's pretty close to where we're at. This one might be a little harder than normal. I think as you use them, they tend to get a little bit smoother and a little bit better finish, okay? So if you watch my last video, you're going to find out really quick that I'm a guy who likes lots and lots and lots of oil. I don't believe in this little dip thing. I mean, the stuff is cheap, and once you get a knife sharp, seriously, I've had the same bottle of oil that I've used in my sharpening kit for 15 years, because don't worry about wearing it, using it up. It just doesn't happen once you get your knife sharp. So got a certain amount of oil here. So now the point is that we've got this knife and it's reasonably sharp. I mean, this thing's coming along really well. The nice thing about going to a finer stone is when you get to like the Arkansas hard, and we'll go to a black a little bit later on, they're very fine stones. I mean, 800 grit is finer than most people know how to use. And when we start to do our deal, when we start to do our sharpening on here, the thing about it is that on this finest stone, you can actually feel how the blade is reacting to the stone. And I'm talking about layover, where you've got one side getting a little longer than the other on one side of the other. Well, sometimes you get to the point where you do on here and you run the blade across it, but it won't quite bring it down. And you do this side, you go to the other side and it feels like, well, it's not really dragging that bad. But you go back to this first side and now it's dragging hard. You go this side and it's maybe a little bit of feel when you get down to it. But you'll actually be able to tell, hey, this side isn't dragging as much as this side. And the reason why it's not dragging as much is because you've still got to burr a little bit more on this side than you do on this side. And so to a certain extent, what I'm saying is that you're going to, I'll go back to my paper here. When you have this burr here and you run the stone across this sharp edge, well, if on that coarse stone you didn't quite get that burr figured out and didn't quite take it all the way off, and you go back to this side and there's not much drag because there's nothing grabbing onto it because it's rounded off. But you go to this side, now you're feeling a little bit more drag on the blade. That's kind of more of a feel type of thing, because you want to feel the blade. So if I go this way and you say, okay, well, that feels that much resistance, and I go this way, say, it doesn't feel as much, and truthfully, that's exactly the way it is. This one is dragging more. So what I'm going to do, because I think that this thing's kind of laying over still a little bit more, and on these finer stones, you'll be able to feel that. It's not against the rules to take an extra drag on that and then come back on this side until you feel that it's about the same resistance both ways. Now, some people draw a little harder than they pull, and you'll have to get the sense of that. But if I got a little bit of a feel that the burrs, that layover is working on this side a little bit more, I'll run that one a couple more times, like 2 on that side, 1 on this side, 2 on this side, 1 on this side, until I get the feel with just resistance that they're basically kind of working exactly the same way. Okay, and so we're going to go to rule number 3. Got my piece of paper here. Okay, you want to use feel, you want to use sound to adjust how you work the stone. And that's a little bit more zen in the art of I'm sharpening knives, because but I think that most people can feel if a stone is dragging one way more than the other. Now remember, grit plus pressure equals finish. So I'm working on about an 800 grit stone here. This is an Arkansas hard. Now I want to, just a byline, I do have Arkansas soft stones here available as well. The bottom line is that I really don't see enough difference between Arkansas soft and Arkansas hard that I would own both. Okay, people will argue with me, but keep in mind I just went from a 400 to a 600 to an 800. Now, if the Arkansas Soft is a 700, some people claim they're the same hardness. You make your own call. But if you have a hard, don't buy a soft. If you have a soft, don't buy a hard. I really don't see a huge demonstrable difference between the two different stones. And you'll be able to polish your blade with a soft and a hard equally as well at this stage in our deal, which is coming off of a 600 and going to an 800. Now, you'll notice I'm pulling the blade a little bit more back and forth across this thing, because what I'm doing is, keep in mind that coming off of a 600 grade, if you were to take a microscope to this, you're going to see almost serrations like a serrated blade on a knife, but at a really small, really high magnification, really small level. So there's going to be really coarse cuts in this blade when you really get down to the microscopic level on it. So when I get to an 800, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw this thing across, even though it feels like the pressure is about the same. I'm just going to keep drawing it across, because basically what I'm doing is I'm just polishing the end of that blade with a slightly finer grit than I had on the last one. I was at a 600 before. This is, roughly about an 800 on the hard. And it's just going to take and smooth out those jagged edges that we had before. Now, those jagged edges work like a serrated blade that you'd have on a counter to cut bread with. To a certain extent, a serration will add sharpness to a blade, because you get these, microscopic little jagged, chainsaw effect on the end of your blade. But in order to get this blade really super sharp, you want to get rid of that chainsaw effect and get to a really honed, polished surface. And so how long have I been doing this? 2 or 3 minutes or whatever else. As you get closer and closer to finishing off with your stone, you might want to remember pressure plus grit equals finish, or vice versa. So I'm going to really lightly, I'm really picking up on the pressure. In fact, I usually use my other finger just to kind of help control it across the tip, because it's hard to control with your wrist as accurately. But I'm really picking up on this thing, because I'm getting to the point where I want to be done with this blade. I haven't checked it for softness, but I'm really going by just the feel of the drag against the stone. Okay, so then I'll, run my finger across it and see. Now this is an Arkansas hard, and I haven't done any stropping or any sticks on this or anything like that. But but if you saw my last video that I had, where I just got done with this thing on a 600 blade, this on the 800 is getting obviously noticeably sharper. So I'm going to go on, because I haven't spent as much time on this as I want. You probably don't want me to waste too much of your time. So that's an Arkansas hard stone. I really like the Arkansas stones. I have Japanese water stones. I'm going to be producing videos on there. They've got some really cool advantages to it. But the bottom line is you can use an Arkansas stone until you die, and it will still be, the perfect stone. God, I don't know how many knives you would have to have, or how much time you would have to be sharpening to wear out one Arkansas stone. They are just like totally indestructible. And proof in point is, I'm pulling out an Arkansas black now, and this is a stone that I've had for about 40 years. In fact, there's a big crack in it that you can see. Doesn't seem to affect the performance at all. I bought this in a kit when I was, like 9 years old. And I've used this stone at hunting camp when I was elk hunting this year. There was only 4 of us. We only got 4 elk. It was a really depressing time. So here again, lots of oil. I like to put that on. Now, Arkansas blackstone, there's a lot of people that really argue about the grit of this thing, but you're talking 1200-ish grit on that. And so this is just taking those fine, minute, microscopic serrations that were on the 800 grit, because they still will be there, because 800 grit is 800 grit, and it's going to leave some marks although obviously considerably smaller than 600. 1200 is just going to polish those serrations off even more and just give you a better feel. Now, the one nice thing about the black Arkansas is this is just a really fine stone, and any amount of layover that you have is going to be really easy to feel, because it's just going to grip so bad as it goes across that thing. And a certain amount of this is zen and just feeling that layover, and the other part is just that I've done it so long that you can really feel when that thing's going that way. Now, when you get to the 1200, to the black, some people will argue about my grit ratings, but it's just semantics. When I worked that, when I started out in the last video, I did 400, and I made, oh geez, I don't even know. I'll have to go back and count. 20 strokes, 25 strokes, 30 strokes, and I switched over to the 600 right away, because when you're working with a really, really fine or coarse stone, it's not going to take very much pressure, and not going to take very many strokes to take a lot of material off and really work that blade the way you want. And when I went to the 600, I didn't use nearly as many strokes on the 600 as I did on the 800, because as you go farther along, we're taking off a lot less material, and it's more of a polishing effect that we're doing here. And so the point is, and you can see there's so much oil on here, it's almost pulling up as I go across, and that's the way I like it. You're gonna, if you could wipe off this oil and really take a look at it, I've been stroking on this thing for 20 or 30 strokes, and it's almost clear, because I've gotten to this point and we're not taking very much metal off of this knife anymore, and the oil is going to show the amount of metal we're coming off, because that's going to contaminate it and turn it dark. So I'm going to end this video and start what is going to be my third and final video on this subject, going through the Arkansas Black. And I'll work another 10 or 15 minutes on this blade, on that black stone, to really to work on just fine-tuning that as much. Now when I come back, we'll talk about the final process, which could really be worked almost anywhere. But if you're doing that, I'm stroking on one side, I'm stroking on the other. I'm stroking on one side, I'm stroking on the other. Controlling the layover. Okay, so it's not going to be too far stroked on one side, too on the other. And as we go, we might say, hey, it's dragging more on this side, so you'll give 3 or 4 strokes to get that chisel point back down, and going with the feel of the blade. If you can control the layover, you're going to make it sharp. Okay, remember that grit times pressure equals finish. Now, even though I'm on a really dark stone now, and I'm on a 1200 grit basically, if I push hard on that 1200, it's going to take a lot of material off. If I drag lightly on it, it's going to take less off, and it's going to polish it more finely. So the finish of the blade and how well polished it is dependent on the grit of the stone, but you can adjust that with the pressure that you're doing on there. And so keep that in mind. Also remembering, with this particular deal, we're using feel, we're using sound. When I put this blade across here, if I hear more cutting action going on one side than the other, if it seems like it's dragging more on this side, well, then I'll give it 2 or 3, because it's laid over more in that direction. Now, because I've been doing this blade since I started on the 400 grit on my alternating design, not doing 5 strokes and 5 strokes, and that's just pisses me off when I see people doing that. Okay, this particular system really helps to eliminate that layover. And of course, now when we're working with such a fine stone, it's going to take a lot longer to get to the point where the blade's actually really polished and really fine. But but the bottom line is that I've worked on this blade for, oh, that was bad. I've worked on this blade for physically on the stone for probably about 10 minutes total in 30 minutes of video. And this thing would impress anybody that you know. It really would. And there's actually another level that we can go to past this. The next level we're going to is the level where a lot of these guys start. They're like, oh, well, you know, I've got this dangerously sharp knife, and I'm going to show you how I got there. I basically took a completely worthless knife and brought it to a point where if you had this in your sheath and somebody pulled it out and tested it, they would go, holy crap, that's a sharp knife. And in that process that you've seen, like I say, if you didn't see the first video, you really should go back and watch it, because it really helps you get the understanding about how we got to this point. And we just have one more layer to go, and we'll talk about different types of stones and different types of touch-ups. We'll talk about stropping, talk about ceramics, which you'll notice I've cut paper and I haven't used ceramics yet, because that's just one other level to control that layover, to control that burr process that we'll talk about then. So see you then.